Silence must be heard. More time is required. Silence must be heard. Silence must be heard.
Hello, Gwe, bonjour, Danagok. My name is WhiteDove, and I want to thank you. I want to invite you to the series called Silence Must Be Heard. The other issue that surrounds identity are the remaining Native American nations, Aboriginal peoples, have to prove that they are legitimate, authentic tribes or nations in order to get federally recognized. That federal recognition is necessary, is required by the United States governments and Canadian government, so that these Aboriginal nations or tribal peoples can receive financial economic help. And I have heard non-Native people speak negatively about Native Americans receiving financial help, and I believe it's because they don't understand the whole history of what happened here during colonization. When the colonizers, the newcomers, first came here, all of the Native American nations that were here, all of the Aboriginal nations, from the Wabanaki nations, the Lakota nations, the Lakota Sioux, the Iroquois, the Navajo, all of the 500 nations were on a nation-to-nation relationship with the governments of the newcomers, as far as land acquisition and so forth. The newcomers wanted to create treaties with the Native Americans so that they could acquire lands for their own settlements here. And what happened was a lot of the treaties were deceptive, and the Native Americans were cheated out of their lands in a sense. They were oftentimes marginalized onto undesirable portions of land where they could no longer make a living for themselves. And so they were pushed onto these reserves by the government, and the government in turn wanted the surviving Native American peoples to be completely dependent on them, and dependent for everything, food, clothing, dependent on everything for survival. And because the Native peoples lost their land base and were driven from their ancestral homelands where they were able to be independent, self-reliant, and make a living, they lost their land base and their nationhood, and therefore lost their nation-to-nation relationship with the governments of the colonizing countries, and also with the government of America and Canada. And so this has a lot to do with identity issues. Losing your nationhood, your land base. The other thing that the governments in Canada and the United States did was to try to assimilate Native peoples, Aboriginal peoples, into mainstream society by forcing them to give up speaking their languages, forcing them to stop practicing their cultures, their spirituality, their traditions, and sending their Aboriginal children to mission schools Catholic schools where they were completely forced to give up their native ways and their native languages. On September 13, 2007, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This followed more than 20 years of discussions within the United Nations system. Indigenous representatives played key roles in the development of this declaration. However, there are two countries on the United Nations that have not yet accepted this document, and that's Canada and the United States. The Aboriginal people of both the United States and Canada are still trying to get these two countries to adopt the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. There are over 370 million Indigenous people in Africa, the Americas, Asia, Europe, and the Pacific. They are among the most impoverished, marginalized, and frequently victimized people in the world. Effective implementation of the Declaration would result in significant improvements in the global situation for Indigenous peoples. This declaration has the distinction of being the only declaration in the United Nations which was drafted with the rights holders themselves, the Indigenous peoples. We see this as a strong declaration which embodies the most important rights we and our ancestors have fought for: our right of self-determination, our right to own and control our lands, territories, and resources, our right to free, prior, and informed consent, among others. Effective implementation of the Declaration will be the test of commitment of states and the whole international community to protect, respect, and fulfill Indigenous peoples' collective and individual human rights. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples affirms that Indigenous peoples are equal to all other peoples, while recognizing the right of all peoples to be different, to consider themselves different, and to be respected as such. The Declaration also affirms that all peoples contribute to the diversity and richness of civilizations and cultures, which constitute the common heritage of humankind. This Declaration of Indigenous Peoples recognizes the urgent need to respect and promote the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples which derive from their political, economic, and social structures and from their culture, spiritual traditions, histories, and philosophies, especially their rights to their lands, territories, and resources. The Declaration also recognizes the urgent need to respect and promote the rights of Indigenous peoples affirmed in treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements with states. The Declaration also welcomes the fact that Indigenous peoples are organizing themselves for political, economic, social, and cultural enhancement, and in order to bring to an end all forms of discrimination and oppression wherever they occur. Silence must be heard. Listen. All oppressed people must break the silence.